Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next talk. This is Freeplay 2020. My name is Chad Toprak. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the director of Freeplay. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Freeplay hosts and broadcasts from the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, where stories have been shared and games have been played since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and to anyone watching who has a connection to the world's oldest continuing culture. Sovereignty was never ceded, and the violence of the colonial project is ongoing. Freeplay also stands in solidarity with Black communities, both here and around the world, against prejudice, injustice, and violence. Black Lives Matter is not a new or revolutionary statement, but it is one that needs to be said and said again and said louder. So welcome to the session Getting Over It, Game Design in Bouldering. Joining us are game designers and boulderers Jonny Hopkins and Harry Li Shanglun. And I will pass it over to them.
Great. Hello, I'm Jonny Hopkins. To start off, I would also like to recognize I am broadcasting from the stolen lands of the Lenape and Wappinger people, and I would pay respect to their cultures similarly.
Hello, I'm Harry Li Shanglun. I'd also like to acknowledge that I am live streaming from the stolen lands of the people of the Kulin Nations, and that sovereignty was never ceded. I pay my respect to their elders, past and present.
To get started, we're both game designers who really like climbing. We share an interest in rapid prototyping, custom controllers, and physical play. We've been really excited to explore the intersection of these interests and the connection between climbing and game design together for a while.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be able to work with Jonny on this. During the talk today, I'll be showing videos that I shot at my local bouldering gym, Urban Climb Collingwood. Huge thank you to Will Hammersley, the head setter there, as well as all the people that helped out with the filming. These clips are actually excerpts and outtakes from a short documentary about bouldering and games that we decided to make at the very last minute. It'll be released later this week. So if you're interested in that kind of topic, do keep an eye out for it, because we're going to follow 3 routesetters, which are the level designers of the bouldering world, and 3 climbers from the Australian national climbing team. So without further ado, I'm going to try sharing my screen with an introduction.
And I'm a professional routesetter. Me? Okay. My name's Will Hammersley. I am 32 and I am a professional routesetter.
I'm Rob Smilly. I'm 23 years old and I'm an apprentice routesetter.
Hi, I'm May. I am 24 years old and I have been setting for 3 years. I believe 1.5 of which I've been at Urban Climb.
Hi, I'm Mackenzie. I'm 17 and I'm a competitive rock climber on the Australian team.
And we're sisters.
Yeah, hi, my name's Campbell Harrison. I'm 22 years old and I'm a member of the Australian national climbing team.
Hi, I'm Grace Crowley. I'm 17 years old and I'm a member of the Australian national climbing team as well.
We'll see those characters kind of throughout the segments today. But first of all, Jonny, what is bouldering?
So, bouldering, as opposed to rope climbing, is a short form of climbing. So the walls don't typically go larger than 20 feet. You don't have any sort of rope holding you down. So you're only limited by where you think you can put your hands and feet and gravity. You typically have mats underneath you or a partner to spot you. And that's about it. Movements can go straight up, can go diagonal, they can traverse around. but a big emphasis is on the short nature of these problems. So they're sort of, rope climbing is more of a mental game, like an endurance thing. You're on a route for like upwards of 5 minutes and you have to breathe through it. Bouldering is more of a short, more puzzly sort of structured climb.
Right, and when you say puzzles, it's really interesting because puzzles are something that game designers are very fond of sometimes, where in this case, we're solving puzzles with our body and trying to use a series of technical maneuvers to basically get from point A to point B in the most efficient way possible, or even just possible, whatever that might look like. Climbing as a sport, as a game, as an exercise is incredibly playful. And I think a lot of that is because of the attitude that you approach things. Like you look at an urban structure, you look at something that's not designed to be climbed, and you kind of go, yeah, I wonder if I could climb that. I wonder if I could apply my particular skill set or body to this environment. So similar to the playful attitude, it's an approach or a way to navigate an environment or situation with artificially imposed rules and values. Yeah, it's really creative and exciting in that way.
Absolutely. It sort of approaches, there's obviously the whole added dimension to it. So as opposed to something like running, it might be a little less gamey because of the nature in which you go about it. There's not as much of maybe a skill set of different movements that you can apply. And something more like tennis or baseball has explicitly structured rule sets around it, especially competitively, whereas climbing is really nicely in this middle ground.
Right, so like in the constant tension of ludus and paideia, that is the structures of a game that demand that everyone shares the same rules and that the rules are create artificial conflict and valorized outcomes that are negotiable or variable. And then paideia, which is kind of the more what we consider often to be childlike form of play, where it's not about rules, it's about breaking down those structures, it's about mucking up with those social boundaries and negotiating and navigating in a much more Dionysian way as opposed to the Apollonian ludus. It feels like climbing fits really nicely in the middle or the intersection of these in this dialectic.
Yeah, and there's totally a lot of breathing room just for climbing in general. Like, we're talking about bouldering today, but there's so much to go into with, like outdoor climbing. We can see as sort of like a procedurally generated environment from which we curate specific routes from. Like you're kind of exploring, you try something and then it's good. You want to share it and spread it and curate it. Whereas this indoor bouldering that we're talking about today is very intentional. It's very meant to be climbed. Someone is trying to pose a specific challenge for others in doing so. Which is what we're going to be talking about.
Right. So like, on screen now, you can see these holds, which are made out of plastic or fiberglass. And they are the things that you pull on inside of a rock climbing indoor bouldering gym. And the people who put these up are called routesetters. They are the level designers of the bouldering world. And they create a pedagogical, that is, what they do is very much educational. It's trying to teach you certain maneuvers, as well as dialogic, in that they are doing it intentionally to create and highlight an experience for you, and you respond with your body and the way that you approach the puzzles. And frequently that is an ongoing dialogue through time. If you attend the same gym, you start to see the styles of the setters, you start to develop a relationship to that space, which is such a fascinating and somewhat unique, I think, in sports aspect, where there is actually a designer creating problems for you.
Right.
So I thought, oh, sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say, it's the equivalent of having, a level designer constantly with you and being able to have a relationship that your climbing just directly informs them, like a constant sort of play test, which very much easily fosters a community around it, which is really nice.
So in just a second, we'll discuss what the process of route setting is, including stripping, which is what the route setters on screen, Will, Robbie, and May are doing at the moment. But first, maybe we'll just hear directly from them about what route setting actually is. So let's hear.
Route setting is the act of making a challenge for someone, I guess. It's in its barest form, it's putting holds on walls in a particular pattern to help encourage someone to get from point A to point B the most efficient way possible. but it's so much more than that.
It's using fiberglass, it's using terrain, it's using, you know, a pattern, a collection of timber boxes to create, an experience for somebody.
Yeah, the elements might change, but we're always aiming for the same thing, and that's creating an awesome experience for the climber.
The reason we route set is for the people. I've heard people say so many times that like, oh, thank God there's route setters because then we wouldn't have a gym, and I actually feel like it's the other way around.
So how does route setting work, Jonny?
So as you kind of went into before, each route setter has a particular style, and each gym sort of has a demand. It has a community that regularly attends, and the route setter wants to make sure that everyone has a climb they can sort of enjoy. So different factors can go into the inspiration for a climb, whether the route setter is like, oh, I want to scare someone with this one and make the feet really smooth or unstable, or I really want to deliberately teach this one movement and I'm going to force it as hard as I can. So you cross your hands in a certain way and learn that your hips twist towards the wall or something like that. So there's definitely the inspiration and obviously the iteration and tweaking that you see so much in games happening when the route goes up and the holds might move around, they might rotate, but it's all about, iteration and
Yeah, and this idea that like you can teach somebody something just by the features on the wall, that the wall and its problem becomes a type of suggested choreography for the body. And that if you see climbers attempt the same problem, oftentimes they will do similar or even identical movements. Even when bodies are not the same, you can start to build up a vocabulary that what I would consider a ludic grammar as well. And that also extends not just to the play body, but even route reading, which is what happens when you start to see the route and go inside your mind. Can you play it out inside, like, I guess, haptically or viscerally imagining what it's like to be on the wall so that you can get on the wall and send it, which is to say, complete the problem without falling off it.
Yep, exactly. So as we'll see, different climbs sort of foster these different possibilities where the idea behind making a route isn't always the intended sort of, the intention can be different from the way that people actually go about it, which I think is probably the most interesting part of climbing. There's always the route reading section where people read the route together, but then you just see someone else that you weren't anticipating like do it a completely different way. And that constant assessment of your knowledge of climbing is why I love it so much.
And what's really fascinating, I guess, so you're alluding to beta, right? This intended route. Beta is the terminology for the solution to the problem, but it's not necessarily the only solution. It's like, oh, what's your beta? Oh, what's the psychological beta, the micro beta, all these different things that basically just say, what's the way to get over this problem, getting over it. But you can also break beta when the beta is considered to be the intended outcome by the setters, like how the level designer expects you to solve the puzzle. Breaking beta would be to go outside of the bounds of the intention. So in competitions, that could be a really good thing for the climber. A very tall climber just figures out a way to stand on the starting hold and then reach the end just by jumping a little bit. And no one thought that would be possible because they're not designing for 7'5" people or whatever. I don't think there's 7'5" boulders. I don't know. I could be wrong. And then, like on the other side, it could be really heartbreaking for a level designer, a route setter, who's put a lot of work into forcing particular maneuvers only for nobody to learn the thing that they were intending. And this really also speaks to this design problem that game designers face a lot of the time, which is, are we creating systems that allow people to play in the ways that we want to encourage and highlight, or are we forcing them to learn something so that they can have a better experience? And that tension between the forcing and allowing as a game designer is often something that needs to be balanced quite carefully.
Exactly. I think we had a conversation the other day, and you described climbing as sort of the only bodily based but information heavy sport in terms of like competitiveness, where you some competitions purposefully shield other climbers from watching each other until it's their turn. So information becomes such a valuable tool in a way that other bodily sports don't have, which is really cool.
Yeah, like the idea that you could actually disqualify someone else by shouting information is really funny to me.
Very crazy.
But and so, okay, we've observed that sometimes people break beta. What happens if someone breaks the intention, the supposed goal of this game of bouldering, full stop? Like, what are the games that people make up that are not the same as the game of bouldering?
Right. I think bouldering itself lends itself really nicely to that, given that the intended way is never always the intended way. Like you have so many play styles just from the specific platform of the route that you're climbing. So naturally, someone's going to be like, oh, what if I actually go to this hold instead that's not on the route so we can make something else ourselves? And from that, you can have infinite numbers of folk games or meta games of certain routes. And it sort of infinitely generates routes as well.
You mentioned the word metagames. I just want to hone in on that for a second, because our good friends Stephanie Bullock and Patrick Lemieux wrote a brilliant book called Metagaming, and out of that came a manifesto, which I really love this quote. It says, "The greatest trick that the video game industry ever pulled was convincing the world that video games were games in the first place. But video games aren't games. They're tools, toys, instruments, equipment, mechanisms, and media for making meta games." So I think this is very true in the broad sense, not just about video games. There's so many different ways to play a game beyond the standard design intention. There's so many different ways to climb a route or not climb a route. You know, you could play climbing with only one hand, or Oceana, who's one of the climbers that you saw in the videos, climb sometimes with just her thumbs. You know, or maybe you have to touch a hold with your leg and your foot before you can touch it with your hand, which puts you in very weird positions. So these kind of like the wall becoming a platform for games and the game being a material for metagames is something that isn't just abstract. It's actually something like all climbers do automatically.
Yeah, I think it's really nice. Especially, there's always sort of the person who wants to maybe campus everything, which is like, there's different levels of play here going on. There's one where you want to just have the wildest thing possible, and then different styles completely emerge. Like I know climbers that don't want to end up putting their shoes on, just want to just do everything with only their arms, or people always want to try to find the weirdest holds to bat hang off of. A bat hang is where you let go of your hands and then come hang completely by your toes. So not even just games. I think goofing around is one of the most important parts of climbing.
So we thought, okay, we have access to a bouldering gym, we have access to routesetters, we have access to 3 incredibly good climbers on the Australian team, Oceana Mackenzie, Campbell Harrison, and Grace Crowley. What can we do with this? Well, we made them play video games.
Never used one of these before.
Just talk as I go? Okay. Oh wait, I actually get to... Oh, okay, so there's actually some climbing.
Ah, cool. Okay.
It's very easy to make mistakes as well, which is very similar to... I had a sports psychologist tell me once that, yeah, she's like, there are very few sports in which mistakes happen as fast as climbing, and it's definitely true. And where they can be as consequential.
Alright.
Climbing doesn't have cutscenes.
This is a sassy game.
This also reminds me of getting stuck talking to people at the gym when I'm trying to play.
So that's the video game Celeste. And we think that it's a game that really, in many ways, represents bouldering quite well. Even, I mean, first of all, ostensibly it's about climbing a mountain, but even the idea of the systems and the feeling of playing the game kind of feels like bouldering to me.
Absolutely. You have your skill set that it sort of teaches you one move at a time, and then later in the game, like tests you. And it really just encourages the same mindset of climbing. just given the way that sort of the rooms are structured, you can see the end most of the time. So you have a big stage of planning, which is really cool. Maybe not so much like other platformers, like you can specifically map out your actions and anticipate how things might go.
And oftentimes it feels like a rhythm game, like you're just trying to create the sequence of moves that will get you to the end. So let's take a look at this one specific level in World 2 that Campbell played. I don't remember how long I left this.
I think I've got a... Oh, not that. You can only hold on for a certain... Oh my god, this game is brutal. I have to have a plan and I have to execute the plan, and like a bunch of factors dictate how much time I have to execute each move. Like, whereas in climbing it might be like being in a position of control and moving through like an unstable position. Like, there's definitely a path. Like, jump, dash, catch. I have a limited amount of time that I can hold on, and then it's another jump and fall here, and then I have to dash and catch this, and then I have to like jump up and dash this way, I guess. It's definitely, there's a lot of steps. It's like a complex coordination movement or something in climbing.
Yeah, nice, nice. That's so good.
This game is...
Oh, amazing.
Oh my god. Okay. Oh, I'm tired. Like, my brain is tired from what I just did.
And then, just for comparison, here's the same level as played by speedrunner Ultra Marlin. That was less than a second. So, okay, I'm just gonna let the rest of like the World 1 speed run play. It's literally only a minute while we talk about this. What's up with the speed running?
You know, I definitely think the most valuable piece of information from watching that one room in the second chapter was that neither the climber nor the speedrunner used both stamina crystals. So I think they both, in their own way, sort of diverted from maybe the intended path, which goes to show you the things that this game encourages. So this speedrunning specifically manipulates the game's physics and tries to obviously get through as fast as possible with as few contacts as possible, slowing you down. And yes, I don't know if speedrunning needs to be introduced, but has a whole community around it where like seconds shaved off or portions of seconds are a huge deal.
I think the observation about the stamina crystal and how Campbell used one and not the other, then they swapped for the speedrunner who managed to do it in a second. It's like, okay, maybe the level design is actually catering for a large gamut of expressions or like engagements with this system, right? Presenting clearer design intentions, but for different audiences in the same level. That's really smart.
Yeah. That's where stuck in my mind is its relation to climbing. When I first started playing the game, I wasn't particularly sold on its relation to climbing, but it was really when I showed it to my friends and they started playing it and I watched, oh wait, that's not how they did it, or it's different from how I did it. I don't know, it was kind of a mind-breaking moment for me. Like, oh shoot, it is climbing. That's exactly what happens at the gym.
And the way that, you know, speedrunners approach this, the way that Campbell approaches this, the way that other people have found different challenges, like apparently you can do the whole World 1 without dashing. There's the strawberries, which were like a specific designer's kind of challenge. It shows that there's all these different ways to approach a game, and that some of these systems go much far beyond, in terms of valorization of goals, what the designer intended. And so, Jonny, there's a project of yours that I'm really, really excited by, and I'd love to hear more about. You created a custom hangboard controller for Celeste.
Yes, and I have some things to say about it. So I'll go ahead. I have to share my screen. And let's see. Okay. Cool. So I think around 9 months ago, I made a hangboard controller to play Celeste with. And in the process, I had to learn climbing and play sort of all over again, which is interesting. Quick background on the project. For the past year or so, I've been super interested in alt controllers. Specifically, I guess they're kind of niche now, but the commercial alt controller peripherals that make you imitate a certain activity. Whether or not these controllers increase your game experience is yet to be seen, but I think the combination of role playing that you take on when you put your controller in sort of the holster and the silliness really changes the way we think about interfacing. So yeah, that's been my interest. Specifically for the hangboard controller project, my friend Sam and I were following a game a week syllabus in which we practiced our rapid prototyping skills. The week that I made the controller in, the theme was physics engine. And rather than develop my own physics engine or use one that involved coding, I thought I can take advantage of the one around us and combine the live action and the digital and kind of always tackle climbing. I've always wanted to make a climbing related game, and I think there's no better way to ponder bodily relationships in climbing than to physically climb for your game. So let's continue. Why bouldering? Why Celeste? We kind of went over this a little bit already, but bouldering is the exploration of bodily solutions to physical problems. You're encouraged to think outside of the box, see what other climbs have taught you, kind of be patient and look from the ground, envision yourself on the route, see what moves you could possibly do. And these variances in the wall really add to your lived experience of bouldering in general, which then you can perpetuate. And so what we're kind of posing here is that Celeste is almost gamified bouldering. You have the short room by room structure, the anticipation, planning things out, and utilizing your sort of embodied array of jumping, climbing, and dashing rather than your actual array. So I thought if you can gamify the experience, maybe you can go the other way around and have some sort of bodily solution to a digital problem. And that's what I tried doing. So this was the controller setup. One thing I wanted to be sure of right away was the driving force for maybe the controller was the idea of the dash in Celeste reflecting the idea of doing a pull-up and climbing. It's sort of like a fiery motion that leads to dynamic movement. And the action is so weighed upon by the game's design, especially in the first chapter, in the story. It's sort of just like an oomph move that I really wanted to be able to capture with a hangboard. So I have a supersonic sensor detecting movement past a certain point and some touch capacitance for me to be able to hold on different holds. So yeah, so part of the driving force was to be able to capture sort of this dynamic movement. This climber is using, especially right there, that's what I wanted to capture. Go back a little bit. Yeah. Each move, their feet are leaving the ground, especially this last move. It's like the oomph moment of using your dash and letting your momentum sort of carry you from your initial burst. So that's what I wanted to capture. Cool. So this is the first level, the 1-1. I wanted to go over it real quick before we watch the controller takedown of it. But it starts off with just a normal jump to get to the next platform, and then you need a jump and a climb, and then finally a jump and a dash. This is maybe the suggested way, which is obviously different than someone who can just want to dash the whole thing, or someone who wants to maybe just jump. Yeah, so let's see the controller attempt. Here we go. This was my first attempt at 1-1. As you can see, let me slow it down actually. Ooh, I don't know how the quality is. There you go. So you hop up. A lot of my movements are really heavy, maybe not so deliberate. Even from the ground, I tried to visualize myself on this route, but because of the way that the climbing sort of translated to the climbing on the hangboard, it was new to me. So on basically every movement, I'm doing almost a full pull-up to try to continue, which is not the easiest way to go about things, but maybe something that you would see someone at the gym do when they don't know how to save energy. You watch someone who just starts climbing, and they tend to pull up on every move. So I found it interesting that despite having climbing experience, I still tended to do this in sort of uneasy grounds. When I wasn't sure what to do, I would just kind of lock off. So this is my attempt more recently. And for this, I tried to be as energy saving as possible, and I try to maintain low body posture and only sort of go past that 90-degree mark when I need it. So here's the, oops. This is the beta that I tried doing to try to save as much energy as possible. I would go, I would go, I would climb, I would go, and then I wouldn't dash because I'm trying to save energy, and I was doing this for a while. So I try to stick the landing and continue with the level. There's a little bit up here, but I think this is mostly what they're trying to teach you. And so translating this to the hangboard is really sort of the, I guess, the peak of the experience of using it. So we have a go to the right and then a jump. And then something that immediately struck me, I guess maybe in the first video, which is why I was so uneasy, was that there's no safe place to put my hands. If I put my hands on the jump, I'll jump. If I put my hands on the going right, I'll go right. Be it the lack of holdable things or something, I needed some place to put my hands. So I had to just put it there, even though I didn't need to. That's the R is the grab button, sorry. And then another jump, and then this time I had to stick it, and then I move my left hand up, and then another run and a jump, and I stick it, and then climb up. So that's the intended beta, sort of like this rhythm game that we were talking about, whereas on a bouldering wall, you might find yourself being able to set your own pace a little bit more. Maybe it's because I didn't have access to footholds, so I was kind of stressed for time, so I wanted to find this rhythm, the left, right, right, left sort of thing going on. So here's the development. Sort of trying to find the movement. And this was a really educational moment for me in terms of the difference between the interface, what's happening digitally, and how it would normally work on a climbing wall. Maybe it's because I can only hold 2 buttons at a time, but my dynamic movement isn't actually carrying me, because if you look here, my right hand needs to go and then needs to grab. So because I have to switch to the grab, I'm no longer going right. So my momentum that I would normally have on the climbing wall is not carrying me, which was a big issue. So I found this to be like a kind of game-breaking moment for me, like, oh, I'm not actually climbing. So observation. Continue. Eventually, I sort of got the hang of it. Got the beta down, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Should hop up. Yeah. So go up, sort of find the rhythm. Try to pace it out. I grab it. Here you go. That was this run, and then I immediately run out of stamina and knowledge of what I'm doing, and then I die. So that's not fun. But that was sort of the general, what did I learn from this level experience? I don't have a safe spot to put my hands. Multiple buttons at the same time are hard, which sort of challenges this idea of game space versus climb space. When you're reading a route from the ground, when you're bouldering, it's pretty clear to you, ideally, how your body will be positioned. And I guess the less you are experienced in climbing, the less you'll be able to position yourself one-to-one in your head. So here, changing the interface for me demanded I immediately changed my execution and my thinking, which I thought was really, it was relearning the entire idea of climbing. So here's level 2, similar idea. Here we have a springboard, and they're trying to force a dash more explicitly this time, whereas the first one a little bit allowed me to skip the dash. This one is like, okay, you have to dash right here. This is what we're teaching you. And so this is when I was forced to sort of do the pull-up, and it became clear to me that the transformation of the in-game level space to my own headspace not only deals with the sequence of like which buttons I press, but also it's temporal. So like a lot of things are done earlier than expected, or they need to be done earlier than expected, and they have to be anticipated. So I'm trying to do the pull-up when I would normally hit the button, but I had to do it way earlier. So that's what I learned from that. Lesson number 2, transforming the play space in the game to the climbing space. Stage hazards are often unanticipated. See, this is like the, oh, you did the challenge sort of part, but I was just way too tired and had to drop out. So there's sort of the IRL stage hazard that you got there, like the actual stamina you have. And so, yeah, there's sort of, and then once in a while, like with this run, sort of the stamina in-game in real life, thought it was funny, sort of match themselves. So right here, Madeline loses her stamina right as I fall, because tragedy. And here we have the successful run, just get through it. Yeah, so I did the little hop at the end, and that's what did it. Cool. Other things, observations from level 3. So this is immediately encouraging you to do whatever you want. You can either dash up and to the left, you can dash right. So some interesting observations from that. So immediately, I'm expecting to make the movement, but I have to go over to the grab hold, which I think was maybe like exemplifying this lack of one-to-one sort of thing going on, because like I do the dash and then I'm expected to grab it because I'm already grabbing the rock and it's not working, I'm sliding off. So maybe in like an iteration of this, I would try to work around that. And also there's the old like unanticipated beta, like I'm here, can I save it? I try going to the left, but again, like I'm expecting to already latch on, but not. And then here, oops, so you climb up here, and there's this little thing that moves. Observation from that is that, oops. I eventually also learned that assist mode is my friend, and that the game speed I was worried would be too slow, like I would have to hold on for too long, but oops, it was my friend, and I learned, if I get up here, that I cannot stop my momentum when I'm too tired. So those are some spray observations. Yeah, so to wrap it all up, I think sort of breaking this interface for me and then trying it with this other passion of mine, you know, it doesn't really, sorry. It really showed to me that levels are like digestible, permutable, and transformable units, not in only like how they're structured, but how they're played. So the same route for climbing can mean several different things. So the levels aren't only designed for people to take part in and solve, but I think they're designed for people to take part in, but see themselves in and transform to their willing. So I tried to transform the game for me, and I think that was a really fun time.
That's awesome. And I mean, your dedication to game design and climbing is such that you literally bled for this
yes.
video last night.
Quick body horror warning, but I got some skin flapper.
Flappers are the result of the friction tearing your skin off your hand,
yes.
and it's common affliction amongst particularly outdoor boulderers, but indoor boulderers too. And I mean, I've got some tools here, just like to go back briefly to the world of bouldering physicality. Bouldering shoes, chalk bag for increasing friction, reducing moisture, brush because too much chalk makes everything slippery, and for you, I've got some finger tape.
Ah, thank you. I had to use a Band-Aid yesterday. I think one of my favorite observations also was that I was using chalk indoors, which is not a great idea because it gets all over your living room. But as I was chalking up, I was sort of looking up to start the climb, and there's the snow particles going ahead, and I feel like I'm in a climbing gym just because chalk is usually everywhere, and I'm like, oh, there's the particles. So
right, so the visual effects in Celeste kind of mingled with the physical chalk, turning into
exactly.
a chalk snowstorm.
It was a selling moment for me. Ah, yes, this is climbing.
We'll move onwards because that wasn't all that we did with the climbers. We didn't just give them Celeste. We gave them another climbing game from somebody who's very well known, I think, in both the local Freeplay community, given his roots in Melbourne, Australia, but also worldwide because of a particularly egregious sin of making the game Getting Over It, a game after which this talk is named. So here is a little video of making climbers play GURP.
Okay, so yeah, so shift pulls and then just okay.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh no.
It's so cool.
This is like a thing.
Oh. There you go. I lost.
If you were climbing this route, what would you do?
Use my feet.
Hi, my name's Bennett Foddy. I'm an Australian game designer who lives in New York City, and I designed a game called GURP. When you play GURP, you are given a board of like toe holds of letters. They're represented as little rings with letters in them. And each of those corresponds to a letter on your keyboard. They're all jumbled up. It's not laid out in a kind of QWERTY layout and randomized, in fact. And if you hold down that key on your keyboard, your avatar in the game will try to reach for that object. So it's like it's making a one-to-one mapping, jumbled mapping, but like a spatial mapping between what's in front of you on your keyboard and what's up in front of you on your screen.
It's funny as well because I can touch type, but I was all of a sudden forgetting which.
Yeah.
I have tried climbing in a gym subsequent to making GURP, but it was really a thing that I made in the classic video game tradition of like no reference material whatsoever, just an idea. I didn't really bother to look it up. I didn't do any research whatsoever. I didn't know what free soloing is. It didn't occur to me that somebody should have ropes if they're climbing up. I think it probably was thinking about that scene from The Princess Bride, where the guy just hauls himself up a cliff with brute strength.
He's climbing the rope. And he's gaining on us. Inconceivable.
Yeah, I had absolutely no experience of climbing or knowledge of climbing or research into climbing before I made GURP.
I think it's more realistic than I thought it was going to be. Like, even though the feet like come right up, it still kind of like represents how you campus because you want to be using your legs a lot to get the momentum, and like having to like lock off and go to a hold is pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool.
When I'm climbing, I have a little bit more control to like really throw towards something.
If you went to a certain hold and then you couldn't reach one, you would have to like climb back down, which can happen as well in climbing. If you go the wrong way, you'd have to like retrace your steps, and having to like do the lock before you can reach it. That's also really pretty realistic. Yes, like having to plan out your beta and yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like your ability to dig yourself into a hole.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
like very, very reminiscent of actual climbing. Like there were a few moments where I was just stuck, you know. What if I go, oh, he can't cross his midsection. Like he can't turn away from the wall apparently. So my only options really go to M, which he almost did, but he's weak. What's a bird? Oh,
There's an ideal way of playing GURP that just presents itself when you play the first time, which is that you're not going to be waiting at all. You're going to be harnessing the kind of pendulum motion of the guy and trying to flow up the wall in a way that speed climbers do in real life. So I do think people will try to do that, and when they get good at the game, that's what they're doing more of. There's no waiting for any of that pendulum motion to settle. You're always trying to use your upward momentum to try to maintain it and not lose any of your angular or linear momentum, trying to harness it. Because every time you allow gravity, like every millisecond that gravity pulls you back down, you're just losing that momentum the whole time.
So that's GURP. Here's Mega GURP. Mega GURP is a mod of GURP made by Doug Wilson. And it takes the kind of remediation approach of saying, okay, if GURP is about the metonymic or mimicry of the tension of holding onto something with your fingertips, then Mega GURP expands that all the way back out to the full body exercise that climbing originally is. And through the double translation, you get some really funny effects.
So Mega GURP, I guess, was an adaptation of GURP into a kind of alt controller, a physical realm that was done by Doug Wilson and friends in the Copenhagen Party Boat in I guess in probably 2010, 2011. Doug had the idea of taking 4 Dance Dance Revolution mats, which are like it's like a thing that you lay out on the floor that has 9 buttons on it, and he laid them out in a grid and stuck giant letters to them. So instead of playing the game on a keyboard as you would by yourself normally, instead you're trying to stand on giant letters like Tom Hanks in Big. You're looking up and you're looking at your feet, and you have none of this kind of sense memory of where the keys are. You're kind of looking for them. So it's sort of in some ways a slower, more contemplative experience, and much more embodied in a certain way. But it was a way, I think, for Doug of playing with the concept that was already there in original GURP, which is this concept of correspondence between what's happening on a screen and what the control surface is like, whether or not there is like an analogy between the keyboard or the game controller or whatever it might be, and what your avatar is doing on the screen.
Okay. This is an accurate representation. It's like almost one of my first video games that I've played. I played like Mario Kart, and it's pretty cool. I think it's fun.
What do you think about video games now?
I like climbing ones.
There you go. Video games are cool. Particularly interesting to me was that Osha did not really play Celeste with much enthusiasm, but really enjoyed GURP. And I think there's something to be said there about the modality or the world that they live in, right? Like GURP and other games which completely rework our understanding of control mechanisms or goal states and kind of assume no prior knowledge and draw context heavily from the real world, like almost like skeuomorphic game design, not in a literal image-based sense, but the design sense, actually have a much broader approachability than games which are firmly embedded in a particular ludic grammar in a genre. And I want to assert that at the end of the day, genre is actually not so much about the elements of the game formally, although obviously you can construct a framework that makes that work. In some ways, it's about the expectation of who you're courting as your audience and as your player. So in both climbing and game design, we find that games and climbs are for players, for the climber. And the style, voice, and mechanisms of your climb and game design are always being filtered through that lens. I can continue speaking.
Oh, sorry, I got a little lost.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. Yeah, totally. So just as like a genre could like be for the players as much as it is for the form, you're getting curations of different types of climbs that perpetuate themselves. Like there's like my personal favorite type of climb is a slab. So it's when the wall isn't leaning outward at an overhang, so you're not hanging, you're leaning inwards, which is really contingent on maintaining a strong sense of balance. And I think that it's a niche that some climbers hate, but some climbers really flock to, and like just it has its like own micro community in the climbing gym. I think that really speaks to it.
So if we acknowledge that, like, you know, climbing is really great at creating these micro communities, and it is incredibly social, and it changes people's lives very dramatically. You know, this number of times I've heard people say climbing and bouldering literally saved my life. The mental health effects, the effect, you know, it was the first sport that I was able to actually feel like an athlete, or that, you know, I was able to get physical exercise without feeling judged. All these things. First of all, what contributes to that culture? Why is climbing so welcoming? Is that something inherent to it, or is it more about its origins?
I think definitely in terms of like the formal nature, or when you're just at a climbing gym, the structure of it is that obviously no one could all be on the wall at the same time. So there's a natural sort of spectating aspect to it. And in doing so, you get to kind of open yourself up to someone else's style. And I think that just causes conversation really naturally. And it's really neat. And also like encourages sort of this positive environment. Even in competitive scenes, you have people sharing beta when they're on the ground. You have them encouraging each other. So I think it's just really natural for you to show up at a climbing gym and then start climbing something and then have someone just strike up a conversation with you. And yeah, it just keeps going from there.
And I noticed that there's a lot of elements that almost cross over from the cultural to the mechanical that actually do contribute to that as well. Everything from lingo, language, not just as a barrier, but even as a source of belonging, the sense that you are part of the community because you now know the secret language of beta, crux move, campusing, which now our free play audience is part of as well. And there are, this is not to say that there aren't problems in these communities. There's, systemic inequality and injustice everywhere that you look. There are people trying to address these problems. Routesetters not getting paid, issues about labor, representation and equity along the lines of gender, sexuality, race, physical disability and accessibility. The question of how do you make climbs accessible, not just in the sense of a short person and a tall person will both find meaningful challenge out of this, but how about somebody who uses a wheelchair? How about somebody who is blind? And just like these kind of questions of how do you actually make this sport as welcoming as possible so that it can thrive, not just as a sport, but as the community of players. And I would like to point out several organizations from climbing QTs here locally in Melbourne to Indigenous Women Climb internationally are really paving the way for opening these conversations that are so important to not just climbing, but also games. To close us off, therefore, and then maybe we'll take some questions, unless you had any final comments on that, Jonny.
No, you can go ahead. I like that conclusion a lot.
Yeah, I guess okay, just to formalize that a little bit, right? The conclusion that we're trying to draw towards is that when you get into the art, craft, and nitty-gritty of creating games or bouldering routes, you encounter the myriad possibilities, right? The dynamic and emergent play, how level design can shape or force or encourage expressiveness. And so you end up pushing against the neat abstract definitions and finding richer possibility space, particularly sometimes in breaking what you think of as normal. And it's actually about metagames. It's actually about playfulness and subversion. And these things, they're all possible. They exist because ultimately games and bouldering routes are for players and climbers. We don't create bouldering routes or games as platonic ideals. We create them for people and communities. And it is those people and communities that give these things value and meaning. So whether you're designing levels in a video game or routes on a wall, whether you're creating a positive bouldering gym culture or moderating a Discord, in all these things, you're fostering a community. You're doing it for people. None of these decisions exist in a vacuum. They relate to the context and culture and history and communities, and they affect real life people. Once we recognize that all these things are about the relational, the social, then we can be a lot more intentional with our practice as game designers, routesetters, theater makers, architects, gardeners, musicians, activists, writers, people. Here's the final clip.
I'd say community is the biggest thing for me in climbing.
And if I'm here by myself, it's kind of going to be like a low session. I'm not really going to be having that much fun. Yeah, you're just kind of getting the session done. But if you have like a really great group of people, it's really exciting. It's fun. You're making up new games, new boulders, new challenges, that kind of thing. So
you're pushing your limits.
I mean, people's kind of like the reason we got into climbing is like climbing with people is so much fun. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'd say climbing's a really social sport because you're spending like the majority of your time off the wall, resting and reading the route and seeing what you're gonna planning. And it's a lot easier and a lot more fun if you have a community and friends around that supporting you and just to have fun with.
Hi, my name is Riley. My pronouns are they and them, and I'm one of the co-founders of Climbing Cuties. So Climbing Cuties is an LGBTQ plus rock climbing and social club, and we run lots of indoor events and programs and outdoor trips as well. I really see the purpose of climbing cuties in that it's trying to facilitate a cultural change within the climbing community. So it's really about trying to influence the whole community to start inviting everyone in to participate, and also enabling access so that everything we love about climbing is accessible to all people, regardless of gender, sexuality, and whoever they are.
I've been involved in the climbing community for over maybe almost a decade and a half now, and as a young closeted queer person, I always hoped that somewhere out there there'd be this like oasis of people like me within climbing, or that climbing would be this really queer inclusive space. And I wouldn't say that climbing has been exclusive, but like I definitely think over time my ability to mesh my queer identity and my identity as a climber, as an athlete, has definitely grown, especially with groups like the Climbing QTs, like opening up new avenues for people like me and like Grace to explore every aspect of our identity, you know, rather than just climbing as something separate to everything else in our lives.
Yeah, I'd say even in the past 4.5 years I've been climbing, it's sort of changed. There's like, when I started climbing, I sort of felt like I was the only queer person in the gym, and I was sort of isolated in that. And since like the past year or two, there's been a whole lot more out queer climbers, and the representation that they bring really changes the space.
Amazing.
That was beautiful, Grace. That was really good.
Thank you, Campbell.
I think it's really easy to underestimate the power that role modeling really has within our community and the wider community in general. People like Grace and Campbell, who have been like there almost since the beginning, and now sort of more visibly, they're like role models for climbing cuties and then also blockhouse bouldering. They might not necessarily know the impact that they're having on other people, but it's like it becomes more obvious over time, and it kind of like eventually it catches up on us, and we don't realize that someone else is really looking up to us from the sidelines, even though it's not sort of obvious. You know, people have come to me and said, you know, oh, it's so great to hear Grace and Campbell talk so openly about how comfortable they are and the positive impact that this group has had on the community, and they can kind of like combine those two identities of being like a queer person and a climber, and they don't have to be like separate at all. So yeah, role modeling, it's just so important to have role models.
Yeah, climbing at the end of the day is about the people you're climbing with. I think essentially the meaning of life really is to give love and receive love in return.
Thanks everyone for joining us in this session, Getting Over It, Game Design in Bouldering. We've been your hosts. I'm Harry Lee Shanglun.
Jonny Hopkins. And thank you for showing up.
Cool. There are some questions left over in the chat, and I guess we'll get told if we can answer them or not. It's 1:32. Yep, we got to go ahead. So from Patrick Lemieux, a question for later. Why is bouldering emerging as an organized national and potentially Olympic sport now? It was selected for the 2020 Olympics, and then the 2020 Olympics got canceled for COVID-19, or delayed rather. Why bouldering in 2020? And then a follow-up question, has anyone done a history of beta around a specific rock, maybe in Berkeley or Yosemite, from the 70s till now? Have there been any notable movement trends that have changed over the decades? My gut instinct is to actually merge these questions together in a weird way, and talk about like, the way that sports in the public eye are very affected by popular media. In climbing, that's definitely like free solo, Don Wall, the emergence of bouldering culture in just the past 4 years as a everyday activity for everyday people. But also that like competitions are now, and the sport of it is being geared towards spectatorship in the same way that like the shot clock changed basketball for television. Parkour has changed bouldering in terms of comp setting. That is, setting modern bouldering routes is very different from setting traditional routes, which are kind of crimpy and pulling on tiny things, but they're not very exciting to watch. Now it's more about giant dynamic motions and trying to get the right striking visual aesthetic in a climb. So the two are very, very related, I think.
Right. And I think speaking to the point, has there been a history of beta for a specific rock? Having climbed outside and looking through guidebooks, it's really interesting to see some routes because there will be the main route, which has its name and everything, and then someone will come along and do it from a slightly different start, and then they have to branch that out and diagram it and be like, actually, this is a different grade if you want to try it from here, but like they can give it different star ratings, and like so it's constantly sort of evolving. Unfortunately, as people climb, routes might deteriorate as well, but it's a very common thing to have even the outside world constantly shifting with climbing.
And that is actually a perfect answer from Malcolm McDonald's question, which is there beta for natural rocks, as well as are there links to the Climbing QT community? Just quickly on the second one, you can definitely search Climbing QTs, CLIMBING QTS, and they do have a Facebook group as well as a very cheap membership. And everyone is welcome to go along, even if you don't know how to climb, even if you are an ally and not queer yourself, you're more than welcome to discover what that community is like and how climbing can take over your life as well. But in terms of, is there beta for natural rocks? In addition to Johnny's answer that, routes change over time as they get worn down, broken, weather conditions even. In addition, like as well as the aspect of curation over creation, that because it exists and you're just creating lines as the climber, it's kind of open market in terms of what people consider a climb. It's very culturally defined. Yeah. So like, splitting off routes is really, really common, as is, I guess, like finding the pathways that start to diverge and converge based on people's specific interests in paths. And it's very common that you'll just like, there's so much rock out in the world. You'll go to a place that's probably never been climbed before and you don't know whether it is or is not climbable. That's a really fascinating dilemma, right? It's totally opposite to indoor rock climbing or bouldering, where there's a solution that's actually been provided for you. Here, it's like, who knows? It could be impossible. If anyone has any more questions for Jonny, myself, or anyone from the film that you saw today, feel free to contact us. My Twitter is @LeeShanglun.
My Twitter is @JWHopkin.
And we'd love to hear from you. Do keep an eye out for the, or you can use #Freeplay20. And we'll find the questions there as well. And do keep an eye out for the short documentary about games and bouldering. If this has excited you as much as it has us, it's going to be called Beta Testing. You now understand the pun. Check it out eventually on distillery.site. Great. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of Freeplay. Go climb.
Yes.